It was supposed to be just another routine flight, one where passengers barely notice the crew while waiting for coffee or adjusting their headphones. But that night, aboard an international flight heading to Miami, one flight attendant carried more than just her luggage, a secret that had been with her for years, a secret that could jeopardize not only her career but the lives of everyone on that plane. It all began with a strange look exchanged in the aircraft aisle and a small note left in a passenger's pocket. It was a cryptic message, almost impossible to decipher, but enough to raise suspicions. She knew she had to act quickly, but every move seemed like a risky gamble between what was right and what was inevitable. As the aircraft crossed the dark sky, other crew members began to notice something was off. There was a tension in the air that couldn't be explained by turbulence or delays. One passenger, sitting in the last row, seemed to observe the flight attendant's every move, as if he knew more than he should. The story of that night was never officially recorded. Only those who were there know what really happened. A dark secret, buried in the silence of the crew and masked by the routine of yet another flight, that to the rest of the world was just another number on a list of arrivals and departures. What was this flight attendant hiding? What happened on that flight that changed everything? This is a story not taught in aviation training, one you've never heard before. Now join me on this journey into the unknown and uncover the chilling details of the mystery that haunted the skies. It was a routine flight cruising through the night skies, but Emily, the flight attendant, couldn't shake the unease building in her chest. Her professional smile masked the storm within as she observed the man in the grey coat seated in row 17. His presence was unnerving, and his calm demeanor only made him more suspicious. Every time she glanced his way, she felt as though he was already one step ahead. Finding an excuse to retreat, Emily moved to the galley at the rear of the aircraft. She needed a moment to gather her thoughts. In her hand, she held a small note she'd been handed earlier by a child playing in the aisle. 3 words scrawled hastily on the crumpled piece of paper read, "He knows everything." Her pulse quickened as she tried to piece together the meaning behind the message. Sarah, one of the newer attendants, approached Emily with a look of concern. "Are you okay? You look pale." Emily, trying to mask her fear, simply nodded. "Just a bit tired," she replied, brushing off the concern. But Sarah wasn't convinced. "If you need help, just let me know," she said before leaving Emily alone once again with her thoughts. As Emily stood in the dimly lit galley, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She hesitated before looking at the screen, her heart sinking when she saw the message. "I warned you it wouldn't be easy to escape." Panic surged through her as she glanced around the empty space, feeling suddenly exposed. Someone on the plane knew her secret. Unable to wait any longer, Emily decided to act. She walked toward the cockpit, feigning a routine check with the pilots. But her real mission was clear. She needed answers. The man in the grey coat wasn't just a passenger, he was part of something much bigger. As the plane cruised steadily through the night, Emily felt the weight of the man's presence in row 17. He sat near the window, his figure partially illuminated by the dim cabin lights. His posture was unnervingly calm, his gaze occasionally drifting to the aisle, but never seeming to miss a detail. Emily's every instinct told her he was dangerous, though she still couldn't piece together why. Summoning her courage, Emily decided to test him. She approached his seat with a tray in hand. "Can I get you anything, sir?" she asked, her voice steady despite her nerves. The man looked up slowly, his dark eyes meeting hers. "Not yet," he replied, his tone loaded with something she couldn't quite place. The brief exchange only deepened her unease as she walked away. Back in the forward galley, Emily pulled David aside, the flight supervisor she trusted most. "David, have you noticed anything unusual about any of the passengers?" she asked. David furrowed his brow. "No. Why? Is something wrong?" Emily hesitated, but decided to downplay her concerns. "Just a feeling," she said, though her expression betrayed the truth. Meanwhile, in row 17, the man in the grey coat reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small black notebook. The notebook looked worn, its edges frayed from use. He flipped through its pages with deliberate care, his eyes scanning each entry as though searching for something important. Emily noticed this from the galley and felt her stomach tighten. When she returned to the aisle under the pretense of collecting trash, she saw him close the notebook and slip it into the side pocket of his seat. As she moved past him, his gaze locked onto hers again. It wasn't just a glance, it was a warning. Emily turned away, her pulse racing. Whatever this man was hiding, she was certain it was connected to her past. Emily couldn't ignore her instincts any longer. The man in the grey coat wasn't just watching her, he was orchestrating something, and she needed to know what. Her mind returned to the black suitcase he had placed in the overhead compartment during boarding. It seemed heavier than most carry-ons, and now it felt like it might hold the key to unraveling this mystery. As the cabin settled into the quiet hum of nighttime travel, Emily seized her chance. During the service routine, while the man appeared distracted with his tablet, she discreetly opened the overhead compartment. There it was, the black suitcase. Its zipper wasn't fully closed, almost as if someone had tampered with it before. Her heart pounded as she carefully pulled it open a few inches. Inside, she found a stack of neatly arranged documents, an unusual electronic device, and something wrapped tightly in a dark cloth. She reached out to uncover it, but froze when she heard footsteps behind her. Quickly closing the suitcase, she turned to see Sarah standing there. "Emily, what are you doing?" Sarah asked, her voice laced with curiosity and confusion. Emily forced a calm expression. "Just organizing. Some passengers don't secure their bags properly," she replied, hoping Sarah wouldn't press further. Sarah gave her a skeptical look, but shrugged and walked back to the cabin. Emily exhaled, her nerves rattled, but her determination stronger than ever. She would need another opportunity to examine the contents more closely. As she moved down the aisle, Emily glanced toward row 17. The man was now standing, stretching, as though preparing to visit the restroom. But his gaze shifted toward the overhead compartment where his suitcase was stored. It lingered for a moment too long, and Emily knew. He suspected someone had been in his luggage. The stakes were rising, and Emily realized she might not have much time before he confronted her. Emily knew the situation was escalating. The man in the grey coat wasn't just suspicious, he was dangerous. She decided she needed more information before making her next move. As he disappeared into the restroom, she approached the passenger seated next to him, a man engrossed in his laptop. "Excuse me, sir, is everything okay here? Have you noticed anything unusual?" she asked, keeping her tone casual. The man looked up, surprised. "No, everything's fine. Why do you ask?" Emily forced a polite smile. "Just routine, making sure everyone is comfortable." But as she spoke, her eyes darted toward the man's seat. The black notebook he had been writing in earlier was now partially hidden under the in-flight blanket. She felt a surge of adrenaline. This might be her chance. Before she could decide, the man returned from the restroom. He stopped in the aisle, his sharp gaze locking onto Emily. "Is there a problem, ma'am?" he asked, his tone calm but laced with suspicion. Emily straightened, her smile unwavering. "Not at all, sir. Just checking on passengers' comfort." His eyes narrowed slightly before he nodded and took his seat, his movements slow and deliberate. Emily returned to the galley, her heart racing. She pulled David aside, her voice low and urgent. "David, something's seriously wrong. The man in row 17. He's hiding something, and I think it's dangerous." David frowned, clearly concerned. "What are you saying? Do you think it's a threat to the flight?" Emily hesitated, but the gravity of her tone was unmistakable. "I don't know yet, but I need to find out." As David returned to the cabin to keep an eye on things, Emily formulated a risky plan. She would use the service routine to create a distraction and retrieve the notebook. Her every move needed to be calculated. As she walked down the aisle, pushing the service cart, she carefully slid the notebook onto her tray, ensuring no one noticed. With the notebook now in her possession, Emily felt both fear and determination. She was one step closer to uncovering the truth. Back in the galley, Emily opened the notebook she had just retrieved. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages, filled with cryptic symbols, maps of airplane cabins, and detailed notes. Then her heart stopped. On one page, her name was written clearly, Emily Carter. Underneath, there were dates and times corresponding to flights she had worked in recent months. This wasn't a coincidence. She was being tracked. David returned to the galley and saw the panic in her eyes. "Emily, what is it?" he asked. She hesitated but knew she had to tell him. "This man, he's not just a passenger. He's connected to something from my past," she began, her voice shaking. "Years ago at Tampa International Airport, I witnessed something, a deal between two men that was never supposed to be seen. It was illegal, and I became a witness in the case." David's expression darkened. "What happened after that?" Emily took a deep breath. "My identity was supposed to be protected, but someone leaked my name. I started receiving threats. They told me to stay quiet or face the consequences." She gestured toward the cabin. "And now he's here. He knows everything." David looked toward the cabin, his jaw tightening. "If this man is connected to that case, we need to act, but we can't risk alarming the passengers or crew." Emily nodded, but her mind raced. What was he planning? Why had he chosen this flight? And why now? The answers were in the suitcase, the notebook, and the cryptic messages she had seen. The sound of footsteps interrupted them. David turned to see the man in the grey coat standing just outside the galley, his face calm, but his presence imposing. "Everything okay back here?" he asked, his voice smooth and measured. Emily forced a smile, hiding her fear. "Of course, sir. Just routine." But inside, she knew the confrontation she had been dreading was inevitable. Emily knew time was running out. The man in the grey coat wasn't just watching her. He was waiting for the right moment to act. She returned to the galley and leaned closer to David. "We need a plan. If he suspects we're onto him, things could escalate," she whispered urgently. David nodded, glancing toward the cabin. "We'll alert the captain, but until we land, we have to keep everything under control." In the cockpit, Captain Henderson listened intently as David relayed the situation. "If this is a real threat, we'll prepare for a diversion to Dallas or alert authorities in Miami," the captain said, his voice steady but firm. "For now, keep him monitored, but avoid alarming the passengers." David returned to Emily, his face tense. "Henderson's got a plan, but we need to keep him under constant watch until we land." Meanwhile, the man in the grey coat remained in his seat, his suitcase resting firmly on his lap. He seemed calm, but his eyes darted to the galley and then to the younger man in row 15, who shifted nervously in his seat. Emily noticed the subtle exchange of glances between them, her stomach twisting as she realized there was likely more than one person involved. Determined to uncover the truth, Emily decided to take another risk. Using the service routine as a cover, she approached the man's seat again. As she passed him, she managed to discreetly retrieve the black notebook from the seat pocket. Her hands were steady, but her heart pounded as she slid it onto her tray. She returned to the galley, hiding the notebook under a stack of napkins. Opening the notebook once more, Emily scanned its pages for more clues. This time, she found a rough sketch of an airplane cabin with the word compartment written in bold letters. Next to it was a list of numbers and codes that made little sense to her. But one thing was clear: whatever the man was planning, it involved something hidden on the plane, and she was running out of time to stop it. In the quiet corner of the galley, Emily pored over the pages of the black notebook. The cryptic symbols and codes didn't make sense at first, but then her eyes landed on a diagram, a layout of the airplane cabin. One section was circled in red, the overhead compartments near row 17. Next to it, in bold letters, was the word compartment. It was clear that something significant was hidden there. Flipping further, she found a list of names, and at the very top, hers, Emily Carter. Beneath it were dates and times that matched her flight schedules. Her chest tightened as she realized this man had been tracking her movements for months. But why? Before she could delve further, she heard footsteps approaching. Quickly, she slid the notebook into the galley's storage drawer and turned around. Sarah appeared, her face filled with concern. "Emily, are you okay? You've been acting strange all night." Emily forced a smile, brushing off Sarah's question. "Just a lot on my mind," she said, hoping to deflect further suspicion. But as Sarah left, Emily felt the weight of her situation bearing down on her. She was running out of time to uncover the full scope of the man's plan. Returning to the overhead compartment near row 17, Emily carefully unzipped the black suitcase again. This time, her fingers brushed against something cold and metallic, a small, sealed box hidden beneath the documents. Pulling it out, she examined it closely. The box was lightweight, but locked, with faint engravings on its surface that she couldn't decipher. Before she could inspect further, a shadow fell over her. Emily's breath caught as she looked up to see the man in the grey coat standing above her. His face was calm, but his eyes betrayed his awareness. "Can I help you with something, miss?" he asked, his voice smooth yet menacing. Emily froze, clutching the metallic box as the confrontation she had been dreading finally arrived. Emily's mind raced as the man in the grey coat stood before her, his eyes boring into hers. The metallic box was still in her hands, and she knew there was no plausible explanation for why she had it. "I was just organizing the overhead compartments," she said, her voice calm, but her pulse pounding. The man tilted his head slightly, his lips curling into a faint, unsettling smile. "That's my suitcase," he replied, his tone as composed as it was threatening. "I'm sorry, sir, it was partially open, and I was ensuring it was secure," Emily said, carefully sliding the box back into the suitcase. She zipped it closed, her movements deliberate, and stepped aside. "Thank you for your patience," she added, forcing a professional smile. The man didn't move, blocking her path for a moment longer than necessary before finally stepping back into the aisle. Emily returned to the galley, her heart racing. David was already there, his face tense. "What happened?" he asked urgently. Emily relayed the interaction in a hushed voice, describing the metallic box and the man's calm yet intimidating demeanor. "He knows we're onto him," she said, her hands trembling slightly. David nodded grimly. "We need to alert the captain again. This is bigger than we thought." In the cabin, the man in the grey coat sat down, but didn't relax. He exchanged a glance with the younger passenger in row 15, who looked increasingly uneasy. Their silent communication confirmed Emily's growing suspicion. The two were working together. Whatever they were planning, it was coordinated, and time was running out. As Emily watched from the galley, she saw the man lean toward the younger passenger, speaking in a low voice. The younger man nodded reluctantly, glancing nervously around the cabin. Emily felt her stomach twist. Whatever was about to happen, it was clear that the final pieces of their plan were falling into place, and she had to stop it before it was too late. As the plane began its descent toward Miami International Airport, the tension in the cabin was almost palpable. Emily stood near the galley, her eyes fixed on the man in the grey coat. He clutched his suitcase tightly, his knuckles white, while the younger man in row 15 fidgeted nervously. Whatever they were planning, it was clear they were preparing for their next move. David returned to the galley after speaking with the captain. "The authorities in Miami are ready. TSA and police will be waiting for us at the gate," he said in a low voice. "We just need to keep things calm until we land." Emily nodded, her heart pounding. The man's calm demeanor didn't fool her. He was calculating his options, and she had to stay one step ahead. As the plane touched down and taxied to the gate, Emily noticed the man shifting in his seat. He placed the suitcase firmly on his lap, his eyes darting around the cabin. The younger man glanced back at him, their silent exchange filled with tension. Emily felt her breath catch. Something was about to happen. When the plane came to a stop, David took the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated as we await further instructions," he said, his voice calm but firm. Outside the aircraft, Emily could see flashing police lights and TSA agents approaching the jet bridge. The sight gave her a glimmer of relief, but she knew the situation was far from over. As the officers boarded, the man in the grey coat stood slowly, holding his suitcase tightly. Two agents approached him, their voices steady but commanding. "Sir, we need you to come with us," one of them said. The man hesitated, then handed over the suitcase without a word. As he was escorted off the plane, he glanced back at Emily, his eyes locking onto hers. "This isn't over," he murmured, before disappearing into the jet bridge. As the man in the grey coat disappeared into the jet bridge with the officers, Emily exhaled for what felt like the first time all night. But her relief was short-lived. The younger passenger in row 15 stood abruptly, drawing the attention of the remaining crew and passengers. He looked toward Emily, his face pale and his hands trembling. "I didn't want to be part of this," he muttered, his voice barely audible. The police quickly approached him as well. "Sir, please remain calm and come with us," one officer instructed. The young man hesitated but ultimately surrendered without resistance, his shoulders slumping in defeat. As he was escorted out, he cast a fleeting glance at Emily, as if silently apologizing. The tension in the cabin eased slightly, but Emily knew there was still one unresolved mystery: the metallic box. After the passengers disembarked, one of the TSA agents returned to the plane, carrying the black suitcase. "This is what we found," he said to Emily and David, opening it to reveal the small metallic box. "Do you know what's inside?" the agent asked, his tone serious. Emily shook her head, her eyes locked on the box. The engravings on its surface seemed intricate and deliberate, almost like a code. The agent carefully opened the box, revealing a small electronic device and several slips of paper with more cryptic symbols. Emily's stomach churned as she realized how elaborate the operation must have been. "This device is likely part of something larger," the agent said, his brows furrowing. "We'll need to analyze it further, but it's clear these men weren't working alone." As the officers departed with the evidence, Emily felt the weight of the night finally settle over her. David placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You handled this well," he said. But Emily wasn't so sure. The man's final words echoed in her mind. "This isn't over." She knew the events of this flight were just the beginning of a much larger story, and that her own secret was still at risk of being exposed. The airplane cabin was finally empty, the once tense atmosphere replaced by an eerie calm. Emily stood by the galley, watching through the window as the authorities moved swiftly on the tarmac. The flashing lights of police cars and TSA vehicles illuminated the jet bridge, where the man in the grey coat and the younger passenger were being taken into custody. David joined her, his voice low. The captain's filing his report. TSA says they'll contact us if they uncover anything critical. Emily nodded, but her mind was racing. The metallic box and its contents haunted her thoughts. What could have been their purpose? And why had her name appeared in the notebook? The questions swirled as she tried to piece together the fragments of the night. A TSA agent returned to the plane, carrying the metallic box. He approached Emily, his expression serious. "We found this during the search. I thought you might want to see it before we take it for analysis," he said, placing the box on the galley counter. Emily hesitated, then carefully opened it. The electronic device inside seemed harmless, but the cryptic notes accompanying it suggested otherwise. "I don't know what this means," Emily admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The agent nodded. "It's part of a larger puzzle, but your vigilance tonight may have prevented something far worse." His words brought little comfort. Emily knew the situation wasn't over. This was just one chapter of a deeper, more dangerous story. As the plane was finally cleared and the authorities left, Emily sat in the empty cabin, the hum of the engines fading into silence. David approached her, offering a reassuring smile. "We'll get through this," he said. But Emily wasn't sure. The man's final words, "This isn't over," echoed in her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere the next step of his plan was already in motion, and that she would be at the center of it.